I want to start with the story that I heard on Eisen, the water jug thing. He said, I had a water jug. Aidan Hutchinson had a water jug. You were like, this is the same guys.
So where I saw that water jug? So it was crazy. So it was at the combine. So I was a combine scout. Mm-hmm. And so I used to have to do all the POA tapes, the point of attack tapes. And so I did your point of attack tape. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm a huge fan. Like, I love this dude. So then my job at the combine was to be at the airport.
Yeah.
And so something happened with your flight where your flight got delayed or something. I don't know if you remember this, but you got to the combine really late.
Yeah.
And so
red flag.
Be a top 5 pick, man. Like, he can get his own limo or whatever straight to the hotel. But you actually showed back up the next morning and was very compliant and did the right thing. And I was like, oh, I'm even more of a fan of this.
There we go.
Now, man. But you had the water jug right there. And that was the first time we met in person. I was like, all right, he's all about business, doing the right thing, man.
Yeah.
So when I saw Aidan with the water jug, I was like, oh yeah.
This year, I think you got your guy at 2, hometown guy, the whole thing. You guys really liked him. You could tell. You got Pascal, who we were talking about leading up to the draft. That kid's a freaking stud.
Yeah.
And then in the middle, you end up with your white whale, dude. You guys got the guy that you really wanted to snag. Go into that process of hey, we're going to draft a guy that's hurt in Jameson. He's going to sit maybe for a while. Do you have to kind of go through the owner on that one? Is that a thing that's it's got to be really collaborative because, hey, we're doing this?
Yeah, that's pretty much how we run everything here is everything is kind of through collaboration, and we want to have clear, open, honest communication all the way from the top down. And I just think that's how it should be. But especially with Jameson, that was one that, I had to kind of change my stance on a little bit because I kind of had, just because of the injury, I kind of had him kind of in a separate box throughout the process. And I knew how talented he was and how explosive he was. But I knew he was a game changer, but I was like, he's got that injury. And I'm just like, man, you're drafting, you got to go to get him in the first round.
Yeah.
But I had to kind of get myself out of that rigid, stubborn, almost kind of archaic mindset because just the ACL injury and medical advancements has evolved so much over time that you can't look at it the same way. And I had to check myself in the mirror and say, is that a lazy way of thinking of just going to you're just going to not overlook him, but kind of keep him in his box. But when I took him out that box and just stacked him with those other wide receivers on a fair plane, that's when it came very, very clear and evident that he was the guy for us.
Do you remember what your first thought was watching that game live? Did you watch the Natty live where he blew his knee out? And, because I remember everybody's first thought is April, and just heartbroken for the kid. But you're the one that can actually, at that point, you have no idea what you're going to do in April. But are you sitting there thinking, poor kid?
It was devastating. And at that time, I remember our college director, Dave Sears, and we were somewhere we may have been in Minnesota or somewhere. And that's when I think he ran a kickoff return back for a touchdown. And then Dave was like, this Alabama kid, I'm telling you. And then that's when I started getting really, really excited about him and digging more deep into him. But seeing that injury, it was just crushing. And I just felt so bad for him. Just, everything that he went through at Ohio State and the season that he was having and the game that he was having and all of that. And it all comes down. But just kind of diving more into his intangibles, his resiliency, his passion for the game, I had no doubts that he'll bounce back.
Yeah, the ACL is way different than it was even, I feel like in the early 2000s, the way they look at this thing. Man. I mean, and forget about the 80s and 90s. I mean, that's a death sentence in the 80s and that sort of thing. So It was really cool that you guys took a chance and you had the latitude to take a chance. And yeah, I heard you talking about your mode of thinking with the Saints and how they might be thinking and how that gave you hope that maybe he might fall. You guys made a trade with the Vikings to get from 32 to 12 in division. Is that a thing? Do people, are you I don't know if they're going to do this because we're in the NFC North. I mean, we saw Parker get traded in division from Miami to New England this offseason. What is the code there? Is there some kind of GM code within division trades?
That's a great question. Great point you bring up because we're talking about how the ACL injury, like how it's been viewed is it's kind of been like, oh, stay away. And then how that's evolved with the medical advancements.
Right.
I just think the in division trading, I think that's become a little bit of an archaic way of thinking, just because, just as much as like we're making a trade and just as much as Kwesi in Minnesota is understanding, okay, whoever we select at 12, he's going to have to play this player well. I'm thinking the same way, like he's gaining multiple starters in this trade,
right, and
we're going to have to play those players too. So you gotta come to grips with both of it, but at the same time, we're both getting better. So I just think it's kind of, and it actually got turned on to me last year. Going into my first draft was, there's some GMs within the division that, I spoke with and even for the Stafford trade and all that about like, they kind of felt that way. It's like, look, man, that's an archaic, old school way of thinking. And so then like, I give a lot of credit to Kwesi in Minnesota because he came out and he is very open-minded and forward thinking in that approach. And I kind of think I'm the same way. And so I think that's why I was able to happen.
Well, yeah, you don't want to outwardly say I'm too afraid to trade a guy that I don't think is good enough to help us. I mean, like I'm afraid to get beat by the guy that I can't get something out of, or that there's better capital on the other end of this thing. Like that would be a weird admission to say, like, I'm afraid to trade Devontae Parker because he's going to torch us. Well, then keep him.
Yes.
So I it's interesting. I always wondered about that in division.
I will say this one was, I even had this, not trying to give too much, but a lot of those players that they ended up taking, with, 32 and then in the, like, it was players that we had heavy interest in.
Yeah.
So I understand. Now I'm looking at it as we got to line down versus guys. Now. Yeah. Guys that if we stayed at 32 and 34, like, those are guys that were right there in the wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So, they got some good football players.
So you had, this year it feels like, I know you alluded to the fact that last year you were watching Waddle because you wanted Sewell, which really worked out great. And I love Sewell for a second, if I could. It's very interesting how quickly somebody wants to write a pick off in today's NFL. Like he had a bad preseason or, somebody wasn't complimentary of him in OTAs, or there was some talk about what side of the field he was supposed to play. And the fact that also some guys aren't as good on one side of the field as the other side of the field. Like, talk me through the Sewell process internally. Did y'all hear the noise as it began? And then how satisfying was it to see him kick step and just dominate?
Yeah, you hear it, you just can't really, give it too much attention. What we knew about Sewell is that, he was coming off an opt-out and he hadn't played. And so when he was getting back to it and he had been a left tackle and then we had him at right. So he missed a year and then he's switching sides, so we knew it was going to be as a talented and gifted as he is. And as all ball as he is, we knew it was going to be a little bit adjustments.
Did he remind you of anybody coming out?
Oh, man, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. I will say guys that I've done in the past, he really didn't.
Yeah.
Just because of the, I will say in terms of athleticism and power, when I did Joe Thomas coming out, he had similar athleticism and power, but he was just a little bit different. Just kind of just his style, just kind of his build. He kind of was not as tall, not as long, but just the way that he carried his movement and the way that he used his length was just something completely different than I had evaluated.
Yeah, he seemed like a little bit more of a road grader. Like when he gets out and really latches on to people, it's like it's a bad deal.
Then that's the unique part about it because he's got that road grade. He can move people. He's got power, but when he gets out in space, man, he can really move and dance, and that's pretty unique.
Have there been players that you legitimately knew you had no chance of drafting that you were like, fuck this, I'm not watching this guy's tape? I like him too much. I don't want to be who's a guy in the past couple drafts that you were like, man, I wish.
When I kind of learned to practice that patience and kind of discipline to kind of avoid that is the time with the Rams is that, back when I was in LA, did not have first round picks. And so, there's certain guys it's like, don't bother, don't tease yourself. And so Les used to have those guys is like, look, don't even waste our time. Like, let's just go to the next tier of guys. And I thought it was a good practice of patience and discipline just to not even put yourself in there, because you might see a guy, it's like it might force you to do something irrational.
I do totally. And it was so funny because I hit up Les and I was like, man, I'd love to have you on sometime, like around the draft or like after, and it's a busy time for y'all. And I almost forgot because Les hit me back and was like, let's do draft week. And I almost feel like Les was flexing on the fact that he didn't have to work that week. And if any of the GMs or other people in the football world saw him, they'd be like, this motherfucker, dude, he's just doing podcasts.
You should have saw him last year. We were FaceTiming like maybe a week before the draft. And I'm like drinking out of a fire hose. Everything's going crazy. I'm like, with the first year guy, anxiety, all that. And like Les is like in his office with his feet kicked up, just kind of calm as ever, just like, hey man, and I'm just like, what the
well, he's calm anyways.
Yeah, but it's like, he's got it under control. But man, those guys do a hell of a job.
Yeah.
They've obviously they've set a standard. Les taught me so much about how to do it the right way, and we can only hope to emulate some of those results that they've had.
Is there one thing rubbed off on you from Les? It's not lighting draft capital on fire, but like maybe a something that he told you that stuck with you that you like, I can apply that with regularity?
Yeah, he used to always have a saying of and a saying that you probably heard before, but it's always keep the main thing, and it's football, and you're getting football players. So as much as all these analytics comes in and all these different ways of how the process is evolving, just keep the main thing, and do you like the football player or not, and just you can simplify a lot of things. It's a very intricate and detailed process. But that's one that he's always taught me, and just the ability to be concise and efficient, and kind of just I kind of cut down to the point, and kind of just if you can eliminate as much noise in the process as possible. I think that bodes well for you. So those are some of the things that I learned a lot from him.
Listen to the full podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast streaming platforms. Wherever you want to get the podcast, you can get the podcast. Pretty simple. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Podcasts get pretty wild. This is real tame.